The Vanishing Point. Chapter 1, The Morning He Was Gone. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary quiet of a New Mexico morning, not the distant hum of traffic or the soft mechanical breath of the air conditioning, but something deeper, something hollow, like the house itself was holding its breath. William Neil McCasland was gone. His wife stood in the doorway of their bedroom, her hand still resting on the frame, her mind trying to assemble a reality that refused to make sense. The bed was half made, his side untouched. The indentation where he had slept had already begun to fade, as if the night itself was erasing him. On the dresser sat his glasses. Folded neatly, placed with care. Beside them, his phone. Still charging. Still full battery. Still silent. He had not taken them, which meant one thing. Wherever he had gone, he had not planned to communicate, and he had not needed to see. But other things were missing. His wallet. His hiking boots. And the revolver he kept locked away, the one he had not touched in years. That was when the fear began to take shape. Because William Neil McCasland was not the kind of man who disappeared. He was a man who knew too much. At the Air Force Research Laboratory, McCasland had spent decades buried in projects that never officially existed. His name appeared on papers that said nothing, reports that went nowhere, budgets that could not be explained. To the outside world, he was a commander, a scientist, a man of discipline and precision. Inside the system, he was something else. A gatekeeper. 3 days before he vanished, 2 men had been trying to reach him. One was Congressman Burleson, who had quietly begun asking questions about funding channels buried deep within defense appropriations. The other was David Grusch, a man already walking a dangerous line between disclosure and denial, between truth and consequence. Both had left messages. Neither received a reply. The files McCasland oversaw were not supposed to connect. That was the point. Fragmentation kept secrets alive. But sometimes, patterns emerged. And sometimes, those patterns pointed to something that should not exist. The material was called Mondalloy. A classified nickel-based superalloy, engineered under conditions that were never fully disclosed, its properties exceeded conventional metallurgy in ways that made engineers uncomfortable. Heat resistance beyond expected thresholds. Structural memory under extreme stress. And one characteristic that never made it into any official report. It behaved as if it had been designed, not discovered. 2 names appeared in connection with it. The first was Dallas Hardwick, an engineer whose work touched the early phases of its development. She died in 2014, her death ruled inconclusive, her research quietly reassigned, her name slowly erased from internal documents. The second was Monica Jacinto Reza. A specialist connected to Jet Propulsion Laboratory, she had been studying advanced applications of the alloy in propulsion systems. She disappeared on June 22. Last seen hiking. Last seen alive. The search teams had done everything by the book. Drones. Thermal imaging. Grid sweeps. Witness interviews. Nothing. No footprints beyond a certain point. No disturbance in the terrain. No biological trace. Just one account that refused to fit. A member of the search party reported seeing her 30 feet away. She turned. She waved. Then she turned again. And she was gone. Not ran. Not hidden. Gone. When investigators later reviewed McCasland's final access logs, they found something buried in the timestamps. In the hours before he disappeared, he had accessed restricted files. Not once. Not twice. But repeatedly. Cross-referencing materials, personnel, and something labeled only as UAP integration frameworks. That acronym had begun surfacing more often. UAP. Not UFO. Not anymore. The language had changed. Because the understanding had changed. In the days that followed his disappearance, something else happened. Quietly. Without announcement. 3 separate internal servers were wiped. Not corrupted. Not hacked. Erased with precision. Like someone closing a door. Or sealing a breach. His wife would later say there was one detail she could not forget. Something small. Something she almost dismissed. The night before he vanished, William had stood at the window for a long time, staring out into the darkness beyond their property. She had asked him what he was looking at. He hesitated. Just for a moment. Then he said something that would come back to haunt her. I think they finally found a way through. No one knew what he meant. Not the Air Force. Not the investigators. Not the men who had been trying to reach him. But somewhere in the intersection between advanced materials, classified research, and phenomena that defied explanation, a possibility began to form. Not that William Neil McCasland had disappeared. But that he had crossed something. A threshold. A boundary. A point where physics no longer behaved the way it should. And if that was true, then the real question was not where he went. It was whether he had gone alone. Chapter 2, The Call That Should Not Have Connected. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Not to his wife. Not to the Air Force. But to a secure line that had not been used in over 8 months. David Grusch was already awake when it rang. Sleep had become unreliable ever since he stepped forward, ever since he said out loud what others only whispered behind closed doors. His world now existed in fragments, briefings, denials, half-truths, and long stretches of silence that felt heavier than any conversation. The phone was not supposed to ring. It was a line reserved for internal escalation, buried beneath layers of clearance and bureaucracy. Yet it rang. Once. Twice. Then stopped. Grusch stared at it. He did not move at first. In his experience, things like this were not accidents. They were signals, tests, or warnings. Sometimes all 3. Then it rang again. Across the country, in a dimly lit office lined with unopened files, Congressman Burleson was staring at a different kind of problem. A folder marked only with a date. No classification. No author. Just a single line typed across the front. McCasland, Final Access Log. He had been trying to reach the man for days, leaving messages that grew more direct each time. The silence coming back had not been empty, it had been deliberate. Burleson knew that kind of silence. It meant someone, somewhere, had decided the conversation was over. Grusch finally answered the call. He said nothing. Neither did the voice on the other end. For a moment, there was only static. Then something else. A low-frequency hum, barely audible, like distant machinery or interference bleeding through from somewhere it should not exist. Identify, Grusch said quietly. The response did not come immediately. When it did, it was not what he expected. Do you still believe, the voice asked, that they are crafts? Grusch's grip tightened around the phone. The voice was distorted, flattened, as if it were passing through multiple layers of compression. But there was something beneath it, something familiar. Something human. Who is this? He asked. A pause. Then, softer this time. You are asking the wrong question. Across town, Burleson's office phone lit up. No caller ID. No routing information. Just an incoming connection that bypassed every standard channel. He hesitated for less than a second before answering. This is Burleson. The same hum. The same silence. Then the same voice. They are not crafts, it said. Grusch sat up straight. Burleson stood without realizing it. Miles apart, connected by nothing visible, both men felt the same shift in the air, the same sense that something long buried was beginning to surface. "What are they?" Grusch asked. The answer came in fragments. Not because the speaker was unsure, but because something was interfering. "Interfaces," the voice said. "Points of contact. Not vehicles. Not in the way you understand." Static surged, swallowing part of the signal. Then it cleared. "They are not traveling," the voice continued. "They are appearing." Burleson moved to his desk, pulling the McCasland file closer. "Who am I speaking to?" he demanded. This time, the pause was longer. When the answer came, it carried weight. "You already know." Grusch closed his eyes. Because now he heard it. Not the distortion. Not the interference. But the pattern beneath. The cadence. The controlled, measured delivery of someone trained to brief, to command, to never speculate without certainty. "McCasland," he said. Silence. Then, almost imperceptible. "Yes." The line crackled violently, as if something was pushing against it. Not cutting it off. Trying to get through. "They are using it," McCasland said, faster now. "The material. Mondaloy. It is not just structural. It responds. It aligns with field conditions we do not fully understand." "Field conditions?" Burleson pressed. "Not electromagnetic," McCasland replied. "Not gravitational. Something else. Something adjacent." Grusch stood, pacing now. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," McCasland said, "we did not build propulsion systems." Another surge of static. Louder. Closer. "We built doors." The room seemed to contract around both men. Every assumption, every framework, every explanation they had been working with began to fracture. "Where are you?" Burleson asked. For the first time, there was something like hesitation in McCasland's voice. Not fear. Something deeper. "I am not sure that question applies anymore." The hum intensified. Now it was unmistakable. Not background noise. Not interference. A signal. Layered. Rhythmic. Almost like communication. Grusch felt it before he understood it. A pressure behind his eyes. A subtle shift in perception, like depth itself was changing. "They are aware of this connection," McCasland said quickly. "You do not have much time." "Who is aware?" Grusch demanded. The answer came as a whisper. "They are not observing us," McCasland said. "They are waiting." The line began to break apart. Fragments of sound, pieces of words slipping through. Hardwick was the first to see it. Reza, she understood too late. It is not disappearance. A final surge. A final attempt to hold the connection. It is translation. The line went dead. Silence returned. But it was not the same silence as before. Grusch lowered the phone slowly. Burleson remained standing, staring at nothing. Somewhere, beyond reach, beyond understanding, a man who should have been missing had just spoken. And what he had said changed everything. Because if McCasland was right, then no one had vanished. Not him. Not Hardwick. Not Reza. They had been moved. Not across distance. But across something far more dangerous. And whatever was on the other side had just made contact. Chapter 3: The Place Between Coordinates. The signal should not have left a trace. But it did. Inside a secured analysis room at the Air Force Research Laboratory, a small team sat in silence as the recording played for the 6th time. No one spoke. Not because they had nothing to say, but because none of them were ready to say it out loud. On the screen, the waveform pulsed in uneven intervals, jagged, unstable, interrupted by bursts of interference that did not behave like any known form of signal degradation. It was not noise. It was structure pretending to be noise. "Run it again," the lead analyst said. The audio restarted. "We built doors." The room seemed to tighten. A younger technician leaned forward, adjusting the filters. "I isolated the background layer," he said. "There is something embedded beneath the carrier signal." "Define something," the analyst replied. The technician hesitated. Then pressed a key. The sound that followed was not meant for human ears. Low-frequency oscillations rolled through the speakers, rising and falling in patterns that felt almost intentional. Not random, not mechanical, but responsive. Like it was reacting to being heard. "Turn it off," someone whispered. But no one moved. Across the country, David Grusch sat in a darkened room, replaying the call in his mind. Not the words. The spaces between them. That was where the truth lived. That was where the hesitation had been. Where McCasland had chosen not to say something. "We built doors." It did not sound like a metaphor. It sounded like regret. Grusch stood and walked to the window. Outside, the world was unchanged. Cars passed, lights flickered, people moved through their lives unaware that something fundamental had just shifted. That was how it always worked. The biggest truths arrived quietly. His secure line buzzed again. Not a call this time. A message. Encrypted. From a source he did not recognize. Coordinates attached. Do not trust primary channels. They can see patterns. No signature. No traceable origin. Just numbers. Grusch stared at them. Latitude and longitude. A point somewhere in the New Mexico desert. At that exact moment, in his office, Congressman Burleson was receiving the same message. The same coordinates. The same warning. Neither man responded. Because neither needed to. Hours later, under a sky that stretched endlessly across the desert, two vehicles approached the same destination from opposite directions. No headlights. No communication. Just instinct and the quiet understanding that whatever waited ahead was not meant to be found. The coordinates led to nothing. At least, that was the first impression. No buildings. No roads. No visible structures. Just open land, dry and still, untouched by anything recent. Grusch stepped out first. The air felt wrong. Not colder. Not warmer. Just, off. Burleson arrived minutes later, stepping out into the same silence. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Burleson broke it. "This is it?" he asked. Grusch nodded slowly. "It matches the access logs," he said. McCasland pulled data tied to this location hours before he disappeared. Burleson scanned the horizon. "There is nothing here." Grusch did not respond. Because he was not looking at the horizon anymore. He was looking at the ground. "Do you see that?" he asked. At first, Burleson saw nothing. Then, slowly, his eyes adjusted. And the ground revealed something impossible. A pattern. Subtle. Barely visible. But precise. Lines etched into the earth, not carved, not burned, but altered. As if the soil itself had been rearranged at a molecular level. They formed a shape. Not random. Not natural. A geometry that did not quite resolve when you tried to focus on it. Burleson took a step forward. The moment his foot crossed into the pattern, the air changed. A low hum. Familiar. The same one from the call. Grusch felt it too. A pressure. Not external. Internal. Like something was aligning. "Do not move," Grusch said sharply. Too late. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, not physically, but perceptually. Distance bent. Space compressed. The horizon pulled closer and farther away at the same time. Burleson stumbled back. "What is this?" he demanded. Grusch's voice was quiet. "An interface." The hum intensified. The pattern beneath their feet began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, lines of energy tracing the geometry in pulses that matched the rhythm of the signal they had heard. Then, without warning, the air in front of them opened. Not like a door. Not like a tear. But like a layer of reality had been peeled back. Beyond it, there was no desert. No sky. No world they recognized. Just depth. Endless. Dark. And moving. Shapes existed within it. Not solid. Not fixed. Shifting forms that seemed to fold in and out of themselves, like they occupied more dimensions than the eye could process. Burleson staggered backward. Grusch did not move. Because he saw something else. A figure. Standing at the threshold. Human. Almost. It stepped forward. And for a moment, just a moment, its features aligned with something familiar. "McCasland," Grusch whispered. The figure tilted its head. Not in recognition. In curiosity. "You are early," it said. The voice was his. But it was not only his. Behind it, the shifting darkness seemed to react, patterns forming, collapsing, reforming in response to the presence at the threshold. "Where are you?" Burleson asked, his voice barely steady. The figure paused. As if considering the question. Then it answered. "This is where the signal comes from." The hum rose to a deafening level. The geometry beneath their feet pulsed violently. Grusch took a step forward. Against instinct. Against reason. "Can you come back?" he asked. For the first time, something like emotion crossed the figure's face. Not fear. Not pain. Something stranger. "No," it said. A pause. "Neither can they." The darkness behind it shifted again. And now, more shapes moved closer. Watching. Waiting. The figure stepped back. The opening began to collapse. "You should not have come here," it said. Then, just before the threshold sealed completely, it added one final sentence. "They are learning how to follow." The desert snapped back into place. The pattern vanished. The hum disappeared. Silence. Grusch and Burleson stood alone again. Nothing in front of them. Nothing behind them. Just empty land. But both men knew the truth now. The coordinates had not led them to a place. They had led them to a boundary. And whatever existed beyond it had just noticed them. Chapter 4, The Residual Signal. They did not speak on the drive back. Not because there was nothing to say, but because anything said out loud would make it real in a way neither of them was ready to accept. The desert stretched behind them, empty again, as if nothing had happened, as if the ground had not opened, as if a man who no longer fully existed had not stood at the edge of something impossible and spoken to them. David Grusch kept replaying the moment in his mind, not the visual, not the distortion of space, but the voice. The subtle delay between words, the layered tone, like more than one source was speaking through the same channel. "You are early." It had not sounded like a warning. It had sounded like a schedule. Beside him, Congressman Burleson stared ahead, his hands steady on the wheel, his thoughts anything but. He had spent years navigating power, secrecy, and controlled information, but nothing in his career had prepared him for what they had just witnessed. "Learning how to follow," he said finally, breaking the silence. Grusch nodded slightly. "That was not speculation," he replied. "That was observation." Burleson exhaled slowly. "Then we are already too late." Neither of them challenged that. Back at a secured facility tied to the Air Force Research Laboratory, the atmosphere had shifted from analysis to containment. The recording of the call, along with newly captured environmental data from the coordinates, had triggered internal protocols that had not been used in years. Not emergency protocols. Something older. Something quieter. A small group of senior personnel gathered in a restricted briefing room, the kind that did not officially exist on any floor plan. No devices were allowed inside, no external connections, no digital records that could be traced. Only one screen remained active. On it, a live feed of the desert location. At first glance, there was nothing to see. But the instruments told a different story. Residual activity. Fluctuations in frequencies that did not align with known electromagnetic, thermal, or gravitational patterns. The data pulsed in irregular intervals, but when overlaid with the audio from McCasland's call, a pattern emerged. Not identical. But synchronized. As if the signal had not ended. It had remained. One of the analysts leaned forward. "It is still there," she said quietly. The senior officer beside her did not look surprised. "It was never a transmission," he replied. "It was a connection." Across the room, another technician brought up archived files, cross-referencing the current readings with historical anomalies. Decades of scattered reports dismissed sightings, unexplained interference, all of it began to align in ways no one had previously connected. Locations. Dates. Personnel. The same patterns repeating. The same disappearances. The same silence that followed. One name appeared again. And again. And again. McCasland. In another part of the country, Grusch sat alone, staring at the coordinates on his screen. He had not reported what they had seen, not fully. There were things that could not be written into a briefing, things that would be dismissed, buried, or worse, misunderstood. But one detail would not let go. They are learning how to follow. Follow what? Follow who? Or follow where? His screen flickered. Just once. He froze. Then it flickered again. Not a glitch. Not random. A pattern. The same low-frequency rhythm they had heard before, now appearing visually, encoded in the refresh rate of the display itself. Grusch leaned closer. The coordinates were changing. Not by much. A fraction of a degree. Then another. Then another. They were moving. Slowly. Deliberately. Tracking something. Or being tracked. He reached for his phone, then stopped. The message had been clear. Do not trust primary channels. Somewhere deep in the system, something was watching for patterns, not just communication, but intent. Meanwhile, Burleson had returned to his office, but the room felt different now, smaller somehow, like the walls were no longer fixed. He opened the McCasland file again, flipping past reports and logs until he reached a section he had overlooked before. Personal notes. Unclassified. Handwritten. Rare. He scanned the page. Most of it was technical, fragmented thoughts about material behavior, field interactions, theoretical applications. But one line stood apart. Not technical. Not formal. Almost personal. They are not coming here. Burleson read it again. Then again. And then the rest of the sentence revealed itself, written smaller, as if added later. We are going there. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Not physically, but perceptually. The same subtle shift Grusch had described. The same pressure behind the eyes. Burleson closed the file slowly. Because now it made sense. Not an invasion. Not an arrival. A transition. Something humanity had already begun. Something McCasland had been part of. Something the material, Mongoloid, had made possible. Not propulsion. Not travel. But access. Back at the desert site, the live feed continued. The ground remained still. The air undisturbed. But the instruments kept pulsing. Steady. Persistent. Like a heartbeat that did not belong to the Earth. One of the analysts adjusted the sensitivity on the thermal imaging. For a brief moment, something appeared. A shape. Faint. Humanoid. Standing exactly where the opening had been. Then it flickered. And vanished. The analyst leaned closer. Did you see that? No one answered. Because they had all seen it. And they all understood what it meant. The boundary was no longer stable. And whatever existed on the other side was getting closer. Chapter 5, The Second Threshold. The first confirmed breach did not happen in the desert. It happened in a lab. Deep inside a restricted wing of the Air Force Research Laboratory, behind reinforced doors and systems designed to isolate, contain, and deny anything that did not belong, a controlled test was being prepared. They did not call it an experiment. They called it verification. No one wanted to admit they were trying to reopen something that had already opened itself. The sample sat at the center of the room. A fragment of Mongoloid. No larger than a coin. Dull in appearance, almost unremarkable, yet surrounded by equipment that monitored everything from molecular vibration to quantum-level fluctuations. It had been removed from active development years earlier, archived under layers of classification, then quietly reintroduced after McCasland's disappearance. No official record showed who authorized it. That was by design. A senior materials scientist adjusted the containment field, her hands steady, her eyes fixed on the readouts. "We are not initiating anything," she said, more to reassure herself than anyone else. "We are observing baseline response under controlled resonance." Across the room, a systems engineer nodded. Matching the frequency from the recorded signal, he confirmed. He did not say whose signal. He did not need to. The hum began almost immediately. Low. Subtle. Familiar. It did not come from the speakers. It came from the sample. The fragment of Mongoloid vibrated, not physically, but perceptually, like it existed slightly out of sync with the space around it. "Frequency lock achieved," the engineer said. The scientist hesitated. Then gave a small nod. "Proceed." The next phase was simple in theory. Introduce harmonic variation. Observe response. Document deviation. Contain any anomaly. It was routine. It was safe. It was controlled. At least, that was the assumption. The frequency shifted. Just slightly. The effect was immediate. The air in the room thickened. Not physically, but in a way everyone present could feel, like moving through water that was not there. The sample responded. Not with heat. Not with light. But with alignment. The instruments began to spike. Readings that had never been recorded before appeared across the screens, values that did not correspond to any known scale. "Shut it down," someone said. But the command came too late. The resonance had already crossed a threshold. The sample disappeared. Not vanished. Not destroyed. It was there. And not there. Existing in two states at once. The containment field fluctuated violently. Alarms began to sound. But beneath the alarms, beneath the chaos, something else emerged. A shape. In the air above where the sample had been. Distortion. Subtle at first. Then growing. The room began to bend. Lines no longer straight. Distances no longer consistent. One of the technicians stepped back, his breathing uneven. "This is not containment," he said. "This is interaction." The distortion deepened. And then it happened. The air opened. Not fully. Not like in the desert. But enough. A fracture. A partial threshold. Through it, something moved. Not clearly visible. Not fully formed. But present. Watching. The scientist froze. Because she understood something in that moment that no data could explain. This was not a reaction. This was a response. "They know we are here," she whispered. Across the country, David Grusch felt it before he saw it. The same pressure. The same shift. But stronger now. More defined. He looked at his screen. The moving coordinates had stopped. Locked. Fixed on a single point. Not the desert. Not any known site. But the lab. His secure device flickered. Then stabilized. A single line of text appeared. Second contact initiated. Grusch stood immediately. Because this was no longer observation. This was escalation. At that same moment, Congressman Burleson received a call. No number. No identification. He answered without hesitation. "What has happened?" he demanded. The voice on the other end was controlled. But strained. "We have a situation at the lab," the official said. "It is no longer contained." Burleson closed his eyes briefly. "How bad?" A pause. Then the answer. "We are not sure what is coming through." Back in the lab, the fracture widened. The distortion stabilized just enough to reveal movement beyond it. Shapes. Layered. Shifting. Not bound by the same rules of form. One of them moved closer. And for a moment, just a moment, it resolved into something almost recognizable. A human outline. Standing within the fracture. The scientist took a step forward despite herself. "Can you hear us?" she asked. The figure did not respond immediately. Then slowly, it raised what resembled an arm. Not waving. Not greeting. Indicating. Behind it. The others. The shapes that had not yet come forward. The ones waiting. The ones learning. The containment field collapsed. Not explosively. Not violently. But quietly. Like it had been switched off from somewhere else. The fracture expanded. The room no longer felt like a room. It felt like a boundary. And boundaries, once opened, do not easily close. The figure stepped closer. Its form stabilizing just enough for a single detail to become clear. A face. Not entirely intact. Not entirely human. But familiar. One of the technicians gasped. Because he recognized it from archived personnel files. From a name that had been quietly removed from active records years ago. Dallas Hardwick. Or what was left of her. The figure tilted its head. The same motion seen before. The same unnatural curiosity. Then it spoke. Not with sound. But with something deeper. Something that bypassed hearing and went straight into thought. "You opened it again." The room fell still. No one moved. No one spoke. Because every person present had heard it. Inside their own mind. The message continued. You are not ready. The scientist tried to respond, her voice shaking. What happens if we close it? The figure paused, as if considering. Then came the answer. You cannot. Behind it, the shapes moved closer. More defined now. More aware. More interested. The boundary had become a bridge. And the bridge was no longer one way. Across the country, Grusch whispered the words without realizing it. They are learning how to follow. Because now it was undeniable. This was not an isolated event. Not a single disappearance. Not a contained anomaly. This was a process. Already in motion. Already accelerating. And for the first time, humanity was no longer just observing. It was participating. Whether it understood it or not. Whether it was ready or not. The second threshold had opened. And this time, something was coming through. Chapter 6, The Signal Learns. The lab was no longer a lab. Not in any way that mattered. The walls still stood, the equipment still hummed, the lights still flickered overhead, but the space itself had changed. It no longer obeyed the rules it was built to contain. Distance folded subtly, sound arrived a fraction too early or too late, and every surface carried a faint, almost invisible distortion, like reality itself had been stretched and not quite settled back into place. Inside, no one spoke. Not because they were afraid to, but because speech had become unnecessary. The presence in the room had changed that. Dallas Hardwick, or what remained of her, stood at the center of the fracture, her form stabilizing and destabilizing in cycles, as if she were trying to hold shape against a pressure that did not want her to exist in just one state. Around her, the others gathered. Not fully visible. Not fully formed. But closer now. Watching. Learning. The scientist who had initiated the test took a step back, her breath shallow. What do you want? She asked, though she already knew the question was wrong. The response came instantly. Not sound. Not language. Understanding. You called us. The words were not spoken. They appeared. Fully formed. Inside every mind in the room. Across the country, David Grusch felt it at the same moment. He dropped to one knee, his hand pressing against the side of his head, not in pain, but in recognition. The signal was no longer contained to a location. It was spreading. Not through airwaves. Not through systems. Through awareness. He reached for his device, but the screen was already active. No input. No command. Just a single, shifting pattern that pulsed in the same rhythm as the hum. Coordinates were no longer displayed. Because coordinates no longer applied. The signal had found a different path. In his office, Congressman Burleson stood frozen as the same presence reached him. He did not hear words. He felt alignment. Like something was tuning him, adjusting perception, bringing his thoughts into a frequency he had never accessed before. For a brief moment, he saw it. Not the lab. Not the fracture. But beyond it. A space without distance. A place where movement was not measured in steps, but in intention. And within it, countless forms. Some human. Some not. All connected. The vision snapped away as quickly as it came. Burleson staggered, catching himself on the edge of his desk. What are they doing? He whispered. Back in the lab, the answer was already unfolding. The fracture widened again, but this time it did not tear or distort. It stabilized. Edges defined. Structure forming. Not a rupture. An opening. A controlled one. The figures beyond it moved with more clarity now, their forms no longer chaotic, but adapting, refining, learning how to exist within this side of the boundary. One of the technicians turned slowly, his voice barely audible. "They are adjusting to us." The scientist shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "We are adjusting to them." At the center, Hardwick stepped forward. Her form flickered, then held. More human than before. But not entirely. Her eyes, if they could be called that, carried depth that no human gaze could sustain. "You think this is intrusion," the presence conveyed. "It is not." Another wave of understanding followed, stronger this time, clearer. "This is convergence." The word echoed through every mind. Not threatening. Not comforting. Definitive. Across multiple locations, systems began to respond. At the Air Force Research Laboratory, instruments that had been offline for years activated without command. Archived data began to rewrite itself, patterns emerging where none had been recorded before. In distant facilities, sensors registered anomalies that mirrored the lab's readings, smaller at first, then increasing in frequency. Points of contact. Not random. Connected. The network was forming. Grusch forced himself to stand, his breathing steadying. "They are not following us," he said aloud, though no one was there to hear him. "They are synchronizing." He looked at the shifting pattern on his screen. For the first time, he understood what it was. Not a signal. Not a message. A map. But not of places. Of access points. Of where the boundary was thinning. Of where the next thresholds would appear. Back in the lab, one of the younger technicians stepped too close to the opening. No one stopped him. Not because they did not want to. Because they did not react in time. The moment his hand crossed the threshold, everything changed. He did not disappear. He did not fall. He shifted. His form blurred, then split, overlapping versions of himself occupying the same space for a fraction of a second. He gasped, pulling his hand back. But something remained. Not visible. Not measurable. But different. He looked at the others, his eyes wide. "I can see it," he said. "See what?" the scientist asked. He turned slowly, looking past them, beyond the room. "Everything," he replied. The presence at the center observed this. Not with interest. With confirmation. "This is how it begins." The word settled into every mind. Not as a warning. As a statement of fact. Burleson felt it again, stronger now. He looked down at his hands. For a moment, they did not feel entirely his. Not separate. But not fixed. "What are we becoming?" he asked, though he was not sure who he was asking. The answer came, calm and absolute. "What you were always moving toward." In the lab, the opening expanded further. Stable. Active. Alive. The figures beyond it no longer hesitated. They moved closer. Not rushing. Not invading. Arriving. Hardwick turned once more, her form flickering between what she had been and what she was becoming. "There is no return," the presence conveyed. "There is only transition." Grusch closed his eyes briefly. Because now he understood the final piece. This was not an event. Not a breach. Not an accident. It was a phase change. Already underway. Already irreversible. He opened his eyes and spoke the only words that made sense. "It is not about where they went." Miles away, in a lab that no longer belonged entirely to this world, the opening pulsed in quiet, steady rhythm. The boundary had not just been crossed. It had been redefined. And humanity was no longer standing on one side of it. It was already part of both. Chapter 7, The Final Alignment. By the time they understood it, it was already too late to stop. Not because of failure, or error, or lack of control, but because there had never been anything to stop in the first place. What they had been witnessing, what they had called contact, breach, threshold, was not an event. It was an inevitability. Inside the Air Force Research Laboratory, the transformation had moved beyond containment, beyond observation, beyond any language the system had prepared for. The opening in the lab no longer flickered or distorted. It held steady, precise, like a structure that had always been there, waiting to be revealed. The figures within it were no longer unclear. They had form now. Not fixed, not singular, but stable enough to be understood. Some were human. Or had been. Others were something else entirely, something that did not translate into shape or biology, but into presence. Dallas Hardwick stood at the front, her form more defined than before, her features no longer struggling to hold together. She looked almost as she once had, but there was no mistaking the difference. She was not returning. She was representing. You are reaching the point of choice, the presence conveyed. The scientist stepped forward, her voice steady despite everything unraveling around her. What choice? She asked. The response did not come immediately, because it did not need to. Everyone in the room already felt it. The pull. Subtle, constant, undeniable. Not physical. Something deeper. Like gravity acting on awareness itself. Across the country, David Grusch stood in silence, watching the shifting map on his screen settle into stillness. The movement had stopped. The pattern complete. Every point of instability, every thinning boundary, every location where the divide between states had weakened was now connected. Not by lines. By resonance. He understood now what McCasland had tried to say. This was not about travel. Not about distance. It was about alignment. And alignment, once achieved, could not be undone. In his office, Congressman Burleson felt the same pull, stronger now, clearer. He closed his eyes and saw it again. Not the lab. Not the opening. But the structure beyond it. Vast. Endless. Not empty, but full of movement, intelligence, connection. A system that did not separate observer from observed, that did not distinguish between here and there. He opened his eyes slowly. We are not being invaded, he said quietly. We are being included. Back in the lab, the presence responded. Yes. The simplicity of the answer carried more weight than any explanation. The scientist looked around the room, at her colleagues, at the equipment that no longer mattered, at the boundary that was no longer a boundary. What happens if we refuse? She asked. For the first time, something like hesitation passed through the presence. Not uncertainty. Consideration. Then the answer came. You already have not. The meaning settled in. Not a future choice. A past one. Something that had already been decided, not consciously, not collectively, but through every step that had led here. Every experiment. Every material. Every attempt to understand what lay beyond perception. They had not discovered it. They had moved toward it. The presence continued. You called it curiosity. Another wave followed. We call it recognition. The opening expanded again, not violently, not forcefully, but naturally, like a horizon widening as you approached it. The room dissolved around the edges, not disappearing, but becoming irrelevant. The technician who had first touched the threshold stepped forward again. No hesitation this time. No fear. He turned briefly, looking back at the others. I can feel it, he said. Like I have been here before. No one tried to stop him. Because they felt it too. Not memory. Not exactly. Something older. Something deeper. He stepped through. His form shifted, blurred, then stabilized on the other side. Not lost. Not gone. Changed. He turned back, visible through the opening, his expression calm. "It is not what we thought," he said. "It is more." Grusch whispered the same words miles away. Because now he understood the final piece. McCasland had not been warning them. He had been preparing them. The revolver. The boots. The disappearance. None of it had been escape. It had been intention. He had gone to the coordinates knowing what they were. Knowing what would happen. Knowing there was no return. Burleson leaned back in his chair, the weight of it settling in. "All of them," he said. "Hardwick, Reza, McCasland." He paused. They did not vanish. The answer came, not from a voice, but from the same shared understanding that now connected them all. They transitioned. In the lab, Hardwick stepped aside. Not blocking the opening anymore. Inviting. Behind her, the others moved, not forward, not aggressively, but in a way that suggested space was being made. Room. For more. This is the final alignment, the presence conveyed. No more thresholds. No more boundaries. The scientist felt it then, fully. The pull was no longer subtle. It was absolute. Not forcing. Not demanding. But offering something that made refusal feel irrelevant. "What are we becoming?" she asked, the question echoing the one asked before, now clearer, more urgent. The answer came without hesitation. "What you were before separation." Silence followed. Not empty. Complete. Grusch closed his eyes one last time. Not in fear. In acceptance. Because the truth was no longer something to uncover. It was something to step into. He spoke softly. It was never about what is out there. In the lab, one by one, they began to move. Not rushed. Not afraid. Drawn. The opening held steady, waiting. Receiving. The world outside continued, unaware, unchanged on the surface. But beneath it, within it, something fundamental had shifted. Not an ending. A convergence. And as the final few steps were taken, as the last distance between states dissolved, one realization settled across every mind still capable of holding it. There had never been two sides. Only the illusion of separation. And now, that illusion was gone. Epilogue, the story behind the story. What you have just read is not entirely fiction. And it is not entirely fact. It exists, like everything in this story, somewhere in between. The name William Neil McCasland is real. He served in a senior role connected to the Air Force Research Laboratory, a place where advanced materials, propulsion concepts, and highly classified research intersect in ways the public rarely sees. Reports have circulated that he disappeared under unusual circumstances, leaving behind personal items that suggest intention rather than accident, taking only what he would need if he were not planning to return. The details surrounding his disappearance remain unclear, fragmented, and in many cases, unconfirmed. But the questions remain. Why leave his phone? Why leave his glasses? Why take a weapon and walk into isolation? And why, in the days before he vanished, were individuals like David Grusch and Congressman Burleson reportedly trying to reach him? Those connections, whether coincidence or something more deliberate, form part of a growing narrative that sits just beneath official explanation. The inclusion of advanced materials, such as the classified alloy referred to here as mondalloy, is rooted in the very real world of experimental metallurgy. Governments and private contractors have long pursued materials capable of withstanding extreme environments, particularly for aerospace and propulsion systems. The idea that such materials might behave in ways not fully understood is not science fiction. It is ongoing research. The names Dallas Hardwick and Monica Jacinto Reza represent another layer of this narrative. Stories of scientists, engineers, and researchers connected to cutting-edge work who later died unexpectedly or disappear under unusual circumstances have circulated for decades. Some are verified. Many are not. All exist in a space where fact and speculation blur. The account of a hiker's seen moments before vanishing, the use of thermal imaging that detects nothing, the absence of physical trace, these are details drawn from real-world reports, retold, reshaped, and placed into a larger framework. The concept of UAP is no longer fringe. It is acknowledged, discussed, and investigated at official levels. Governments have confirmed that objects exist which do not behave according to known physics, that are not easily explained, and that remain unidentified. What they are has not been answered. Only that they are. Everything beyond that point is where this story begins to bend. The idea that these phenomena are not vehicles but interfaces, not crafts but points of contact, is speculative. The suggestion that advanced materials could act as a bridge, that human perception itself could be part of the mechanism, that disappearance is not loss but transition, these are narrative interpretations, built from fragments, questions, and the spaces left open by what is not explained. There is no confirmed evidence that people have crossed into another state of existence. There is no official record of thresholds, of convergences, of a boundary dissolving. But there are patterns. There are unanswered disappearances. There are signals that do not fully resolve. There are people who have stepped forward, like David Grusch, suggesting that what we see publicly is only a fraction of what is known privately. And there is the simple, unsettling truth that throughout history, humanity has repeatedly discovered that its understanding of reality is incomplete. This story takes that incompleteness and asks a question. What if the disappearances are not random? What if the materials are not just materials? What if the signals are not just signals? What if the boundary is not where we think it is? And what if, without realizing it, we have already begun to cross it? In the end, this is where fiction and reality meet. Not in the answers, but in the possibility. Because the most important part of this story is not what is proven. It is what cannot yet be explained. And if even a fraction of it is true, then the final question is not whether something is coming. It is whether we have already gone.